How's it going, guys? I'm Matt Torx, and today on my journey to play every single game ever released in the Elder Scrolls series and rank them all in one big tier list at the very end, we get to the third main game entry, a fan favorite, and the very first game in what I like to consider the golden age of Bethesda games. The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, a game that was a real back-to-basics entry for the studio, as its last couple of entries had been more experimental and less well-received. And this approach really seemed to work for Morrowind, as the game would go on to sell millions of copies worldwide, and even winning Game of the Year. So in this video, I'm going to play Morrowind for the very first time, and document my time spent playing it, as I give my opinions and observations that I gathered along the way. So come with me as I play Morrowind in 2025. But as always, before we get started playing this legendary entry in the Elder Scrolls franchise, we need to give a bit of insight into the development and history of Morrowind. Now, even though it came out in 2002, people who have watched some of my previous Elder Scrolls videos might actually remember that its development actually started right after the release of Daggerfall in 1996, alongside spin-off titles Battlespire and Redguard. But in 1997, the project was put on hold in order to shift focus on the other two titles. Once they were both done being developed, released, and poorly received, Bethesda decided to pump all of its manpower back into making Morrowind. Since the two aforementioned spin-off games sold so poorly that it almost sent Bethesda Studios into bankruptcy, they knew that this game had to be their make-or-break moment. And in the end, they did not disappoint, as Morrowind featured all of the most loved parts of the two previous main installments and brought them into a more updated setting. Things like in-depth character creation, a huge open world, a banger soundtrack, a wide variety of weapons and enemies, and a focus on exploration rather than a main story. This game ended up selling so well that it not only saved Bethesda from bankruptcy, but helped to catapult it into the industry titan that it is today, for better or for worse. But to get to see this change for ourselves, it's time I started up a save file. Morrowind starts with the player awakening on a prison ship headed for the town of Seyda-Neen to be granted their freedom. The only trade-off being that they're now under the employment of the Blades, an agency of the Empire. It's in this town that we meet a customs officer, who gives us the option to customize our character. Now, if you happen to watch the first episode of this series back in October, there's a small chance that you remember that in Elder Scrolls Arena, I tried to name my character Barneus the Fool. But since the game had a cap on the length of your character's name, poor Barneus never got to see the light of day. But now at long last, Barneus gets to make his gallant return, as a Breton thief now working under Uriel Septim VII himself. Once we were done making our character and picking out all his skills, the customs officer instructs us to go travel to the town of Balmora and report to a man named Caius Cosades, who would instruct Barneus further. So I was given a dagger and a ring of healing that I would abuse during my playthrough, and sent off on my journey. On the road to Balmora, I ran into a couple worms and a rat that all wanted to violate me, but failed to do so. Once I finally made my way into town, I made sure to ask a couple of locals if they knew where Caius was staying. Nobody knew where exactly he lived, but they did know a club called the South Wall that he visited frequently. Now, something I'm going to point out is how this game handles quests. Instead of a giant map marker pointing you in the direction, in order to get info about the details and locations you need to go to, you need to ask questions from NPCs and actually gather the details yourself. These details get put into your journal, which can get pulled up by pressing J. Now, this was a mechanic in the first two Elder Scrolls games, but I felt like in those two it was a lot less helpful, since the maps were procedurally generated with not enough details to really know where you're going. But in Morrowind, there's plenty of signs and landmarks on the map to let you know which way you should be heading. In addition, sometimes the people giving you the quest recommend the best route to take. I'm a fan of this system, since it really nails down that feeling of exploring the map without making you feel completely lost while doing it. Back to the task at hand, I pulled up to the South Wall and asked the owner if he knew where Caius was. He directed me to his house on the north side of Balmora, and it was on this trek that I discovered some pretty helpful movement tech. By sprint jumping, you can move faster than just sprinting, and what was good about this is that you could keep doing it even when you run out of stamina. So for the rest of this playthrough, you're going to see me doing this quite a lot. Caius inducted me as a recruit for the Blades, gave me a bit of gold to gear up, and recommended I join one of the nearby factions in town, so I could level up a bit before we get started. His two suggestions for groups to join were the Fighters Guild and the Mages Guild. But as an avid Elden Ring strength build player, I don't believe in the concept of magic, so the choice was pretty obvious. After picking up some new drip, I talked to the leading officer of the Fighters Guild, and was given a pretty straightforward task of taking down a rat infestation in town. Or I should say that it seemed straightforward at the time, because once I pulled up to the homeowner, who was really obsessed with pillows for some reason, she led me to my first of the rats, and I pulled out my newly equipped chitin war axe that I got from a merchant, only to swing at it for about 5 minutes straight while dealing absolutely zero damage. And I figured it was just some bad luck with the combat system, so I gave it another try, only to get the exact same result. I don't know why this was happening, but for some reason, I just couldn't hit anything with this damn axe. I might as well have been hitting this rat with a fucking pool noodle at that point. But for some reason, switching back to the basic iron dagger allowed me to actually kill things, like the rat in front of me, as well as 2 others that were hiding in her storage room. The barrels of the storage room were filled with pillows, so I made sure to steal all of them before returning to the Fighters Guild for more instructions. She decided to upgrade my job from rat exterminator to people exterminator. Some poachers had been stealing supplies and eggs from a nearby egg mine, whatever the fuck that is, that was not too far south of Balmora. After sprint jumping across the road for a little bit, I pulled up to the entrance and started searching for the hidden poachers. A couple of those worm things got in my way, which made me lose a little bit of health, so I stopped to rest and heal up a little bit. But in the middle of my sleep, I got ambushed by a mysterious assassin. Somehow, I was able to beat him and made sure to loot the armor off his body, which was so much better than my current outfit, both in style and protection. Needless to say, with this new armor, the poachers equipped with pickaxes were no match for me, and each of them died without too much trouble. Then, just like before, I reported to the Fighters Guild and was given one last quest. For my next and biggest job yet, I was told to go kill some bandits that had taken control of yet another mine. The good news this time, though, is that I think they mine actual resources this time instead of eggs. Unlike the last 2 quests, this mine was located halfway across the map, but luckily for me, in every one of the Mage Guild headquarters, there's an NPC that you can pay in order to teleport you to another hold. So instead of walking 500 miles, I just had to pay some random wizard $20 to get myself to the nearest town. While in town, I picked up a new shield as well as a conjure bow spell. With all this new armor and upgrades, a couple bandits didn't stand a chance. And even though it's a pretty abrupt ending, this is where I decided to leave off this playthrough for now. Now moving things into my final thoughts, I think it's no surprise that I'm a big fan of this entry. It probably is a heavy bias on my part, but I do think that this game was the start of some of Bethesda's best releases. And I see the foundations of games like Skyrim and New Vegas so much more in Morrowind than I do games like Daggerfall or Arena, both in mechanics and direction. Now I'm not saying that those are bad games by any means, I just think that those entries are a little too dated for me to play on a frequent basis. But Morrowind really feels like the game that made Bethesda get their shit together. When I covered the Elder Scrolls Legends Redguard in December, I mentioned how to me it felt like the Brotherhood of Steel of its franchise. A game that tried to do something wildly different from past entries, and ended up failing miserably instead. So if we stick to that metaphor, Morrowind is the Fallout 3 of the Elder Scrolls series. A revitalization that took the world building and core mechanics of its franchise, and modernized them for a new and unique audience. But make sure to let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. And while you're down there, consider subscribing, since it's free and is the best way to support the channel. If you got this far in the video, I thank you so much for watching, and hope to see you in the next one. Peace!